Cohen, proud member of this gang, the Chabura, and it's our great honor and privilege to have with us Rabbi Dr. Berman, and obviously our Rosh Bet Midrash, Rabbi Dweck. Just to explain who we are, a couple of words of housekeeping. This is the Chabura for those here for the first time. We are a virtual and, please God, very soon physical Bet Midrash. And for those who want to find out more, we have a website and all sorts of social media content and other online abilities to access us. And you can go to thechabura.com for more of that. Now, just to intro what we're going to be looking at today, Rabbi Dr. Berman is the author of the wonderful book that everyone should have on their shelves, Ani Ma'amin. Ani Ma'amin comes in two parts. And today we're going to be focusing on the second part, but I will mention a couple of words about the first part because I just thought it was so on point with what we look to do here and the ideas and open-mindedness and rigor that we look to embrace. And there were a couple of lines that I thought really stood out that should be read. So I'm going to quote from the book and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today. So in the first chapter, this is a phenomenal passage, and I think it needs to be heard. Even as the Rambam and Rabbi engage ancient Near Eastern texts to help us understand the Torah, for many there is a certain hesitation to do so that stems from the realm of religious psychology. When you sit and learn, there is a certain aura of Kedusha that you feel as you open a textured, cranberry-colored sefer from left to right. Somehow Pritchard's ancient Near Eastern's texts just don't do it. There is almost a feeling that such materials, even if not forbidden, are surely from the world of Chulin. In our world, there is an atmosphere of holiness, Kedusha. However, figures like the Rambam, Ralbag, Abarbanel freely and seamlessly integrated non-Torah materials into their Torah study. Their model of how to integrate these materials into a proper understanding of Torah should offer us the religious security blanket to do the same. Thought that was absolutely.
That's an ad for the Chabura. That's amazing. We have to ask Rabbi Berman's permission to.
That will be on the WhatsApp group as the tagline. I also just wanted to say the whole first section is about dealing with many elements and aspects of Torah and using the tool of a deep understanding of its ancient context to really unlock some of the mysteries, and it's a phenomenal tool and an essential reading. I will specifically mention the 6th chapter, as we spent a lot of time talking about halacha and the development of halacha from its earliest times, the giving of the Torah. And I think that for those who are interested in that discussion, this Chabur has discussed Chacham Fa'or in that context as well. The 6th chapter is absolutely essential and invaluable reading. The second section of the book is where we come to, and it's an interesting thing that the book kind of moves into seamlessly, suddenly discussing the Rambam's 13 principles, and it's not immediately clear why that move has been made. But for those, I think, paying attention, there is an importance there to question, despite the fact that academia and thorough, rigorous study shows the Torah stands up in the most beautiful way to all sorts of investigations. What are the boundaries of those investigations? And what are the limits to what we can talk about and discuss? And in that context, we come up against the Rambam's 8th principle, which is that the Torah is min HaShamayim. And he formulates that in a very specific way. The question is, what is the development of that formulation from its original texts in the sources in the Gemara and in the Mishneh, and how accepted halachically and historically was the Rambam's formulation, and where does it leave us today in wrestling with these kinds of questions? And on that note, we're going to hand over to Mori Rabbi, very capable hands of Rabbi Dweck, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Rav Jack. And thank you, Rabbi Berman, for taking your time to be able to be with us tonight and to discuss these issues. I'm going to ask you where do you want to begin? Where do you want to dive in from on the issue?
Well, first, I want to make some opening comments before we get to the issue.
Yes.
I can't say how thrilled and honored I am to be here. When I got the initial email from Avi, and it was clear to me that this is a meeting here this evening and in the periodic gatherings that you have in Chabura, that what we have here are a group of people who are very stimulated intellectually and looking for religious intellectual stimulation for their growth. I think that many of us who search for that find that in our respective communities, our brick and mortar communities, where we actually live, not on Zoom, this is sometimes hard to find. We might have a few friends here or there, but our general community might not have the same proclivity. And so therefore, the blessing of Zoom to be able to come together as a community online is something that I just so totally support, that even to stay up at a late hour is something that I am absolutely thrilled to do, to be able to contribute my little part. Secondly, I am a firm believer that the more that our Torah is somehow anchored in our own personal experience, or I would say our family experience, or something that's uniquely ours, not just part of Klal Yisrael, then the stronger it is. And therefore, when I see that there are a group of people who come from a Sephardic heritage and who are looking for Sephardic insights to various questions of hashkafa and of halacha, I know that this is ultimately going to provide enormous roots for those that are here. I guess I'm a little bit surprised and maybe disappointed to see so many of the names that, at least to me, appear to be Ashkenazic names. I guess we're all honorary Sephardim here tonight. But that's also something that is very dear and important to me, and therefore anything that I can share about what is a fascinating Sephardic heritage on this question is for me a huge zchut. And finally, I think that as I've discovered through researching these topics and others, those of us that live in an Ashkenazic milieu have a lot to learn from unheard Sephardic voices, not just in halacha, but in hashkafa as well. And so this is a type of dialogue that's near and dear to my heart. And finally, the opportunity to dialogue and have conversation with Rabbi Dweck, whose name precedes him, is also an honor for me. And so for all those reasons, I'm quite happy to be up and awake at this hour and to begin tonight. Maybe I'd like to, I'd like to just throw out some of the highlights of this second half of the book. And maybe Rabbi Dweck, you can kind of jump in wherever you want. Yeah, so, I think
I'll jump in and say, Rav, that the honor is all ours.
Okay.
Really it is.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. If you're raised like I was, then the notion of Taramina Shamayim, and particularly the Rambam's formulation as it's popularly understood, as written in the introduction to Perek Chelek, mosaic authorship, every single word, every single letter, is well known. And if you were raised the way I was, then it is an absolute hard red line. And anyone who moves in a jot or tittle away from that is out. And there are certainly many voices that maintain that and maintain that to this day. But I do believe that there's a lot more that's going on in our tradition, and it's important for us to be aware of those voices and what they might what some of their implications might be for today. I always found it very fascinating. We really have to start from the beginning. If we speak that this is one of the Ikarei Emunah, just the whole notion of Ikarei Emunah has a fascinating history itself. We're probably all most familiar with the Rambam's 13 Ikarei Emunah. But prior to that, where does the whole notion of Ikarei Emunah even begin? This is quite unclear. Yes, you can find sources for all the things that the Rambam says in the Talmud, maybe even in the Tanakh itself, but certainly the Tanakh nor the Talmud, neither of those texts ever makes the effort to say, okay, folks, here's the list. This is what a good Jew must believe. And that in itself is quite surprising. One would think that this should be quite basic, just like just what is it that we have to believe? Why is it that our most basic sources, the Tanakh and the Talmud, never seem to engage this question? And it's part of a larger issue, and that is that no ancient religion ever made such a list. That itself is also a big question, why that is. And the answer is really very simple. People lived reality. They lived the ideas that were cherished to them. As I thought to myself, and I was very pleased when I once raised this with Rabbi Sachs, that he immediately, Zichron Tzedek Livracha, that he immediately said the same thing. He said, I look on the screens around, those of you that are married, I can see some of you are probably married for a good number of years, maybe even a good number of decades by now. Were someone to say to you, what are the 10 most important principles of married life? I think you'd probably fiddle and thought, well, I don't understand why are you having a difficulty coming up with that list? I mean, if you've been married for a good number of years or a good number of decades, you should be able to just belt it out. And the answer is that, it's a relationship and it's not given over to simple formulations. And even if you take something like communication, I think we'd all agree communication is a very good and important thing in a marriage. But to just say, the first commandment of marriage, thou shalt communicate. What it almost says nothing. Does that mean that I should share with my spouse everything that I'm thinking? Oh, I better not do that. Should I share with my spouse the things that I'm thinking right away at all times? Probably also not a good idea. The point being that communication means nothing until we're speaking about a very concrete, specific situation, knowing the people that are involved, knowing the situation that surrounds it. And so it's all very situational. And so it is really with our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. One can speak about fidelity, and one can speak about, Briat HaOlam, but exactly what this means in terms of the relationship is constantly changing, and certain things need to be emphasized at different points. And so no religion in the ancient world, where they were all relating to their deities, ever came up with such a list. It was really only Christianity that started it. And the reason that Christianity was the first religion that did this was that Christianity was the first religion that sought to proselytize, that sought to bring people in. And as you may have noticed, bringing people into Yiddishkeit, into the world of Torah mitzvot, is not so easy. We all know people who are Gerim, but there's never been a mass movement of Gerim, and there's never really even been a mass movement of Teshuvah either. To be part of this system, most likely you have to have been born into it. And there's some really special people who make it in on their own. But Christianity was looking to bring in lots and lots of people, and so you can't give them 613 mitzvot. But you can give them here, just follow these basic things, follow these basic ideas, and you're saved. So it really all started there. With Islam also got this thing. They like the idea of a list of things, of ideas, basic theological truths. And then we begin to encounter within our own sources the first lists of principles of Judaism, and they're not with the Rambam. They predate the Rambam. Interestingly, they happen to both be from Sephardic sources. Rav Sadia Gaon, in the 10th century, he has a list of principles of the Torah. You've probably never heard of them. Most people have probably never heard of them because he doesn't make a big deal about them. He kind of lists them kind of in an offhanded way in a perush of his on a part of Tehillim. And he just says, oh, by the way, this pasuk has 10 words, and each of the 10 words can be seen as reflecting one of the principles of our faith. And then followed by Rabbeinu Hananel of Kiruan, who at the end of Shmot Yud Daled gives what he says are the 4 principles of the Torah. So this all really starts in a Sephardic milieu. What's interesting about both of them, both Rabbeinu Hananel and Rav Sadia Gaon, is that when they get to issues relating to Taramina Shamayim or anything that's even close to that, their formulation is identical, and it says as follows. It says, we must believe, a Jew must believe, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals his will through the Nevi'im, and that we are bound to follow what they tell us. I don't think anybody here would have a hard time adopting that. It's pretty straightforward. But what is interesting, considering what the Rambam did with this, and what the discourse is like in our own time, it's pretty surprising to see that neither of Sadia Gaon nor Rabbeinu Hananel mention anything about the Torah per se, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, nor about Moshe Rabbeinu and his agency, and it was dictated. It's just not there. For them, it's Kadosh Baruch Hu reveals his will through the Nevi'im, and we follow. The Rambam, who is the first to really, he's obviously not the first to say that the Torah is from Shamayim, or that the Torah is given in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Rav Sadia Gaon also believed that every word of the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu. But when he lists his Ikarei Emunah, then there, it's not so much, he doesn't mention the centrality of Moshe's role in it. It's just, he's one of the Nevi'im, and we follow what the Nevi'im say. The Rambam's list is, and scholars attribute several different influences to what the Rambam was doing here. What's important for our purpose, his understanding of Taramina Shamayim, is to understand the Islamic influence on this. And what I'm going to say now, I thought of this idea, and then I was pleased to discover that Rabbi Professor Chaim Soloveitchik says the same thing. There is an Islamic figure who has an enormous, enormous impact on Jewish history and on Jewish philosophy. And that Muslim thinker is a fellow named Ibn Hazm, who lived a century before the Rambam in Cordoba. And Ibn Hazm said the following. Ibn Hazm knew, like all Muslims did, that the Muslims had a kind of I would say, not a love-hate. They didn't quite know what to do with the Torah. On the one hand, they knew that the Torah was very ancient, and everyone had said it was the real thing. Jews thought it was the real thing. Christians thought it was the real thing. So there must be something there. And so Muslims couldn't just diss it. And so they began to have, in the early centuries of Islam, a theory that, well, yes, the Torah is true and it's divine. And if you read it the right way, you will find lots of hints and allusions, not just to Jesus, as the Christians said, but to Muhammad, as we say. But why then should we not just follow the Torah? Well, the Torah was kind of falsified. And that's why a lot of these hints to Muhammad have been lost. Ibn Hazm came along and said, listen, let's face it, folks, there's nothing in the Torah that relates to Muhammad. And so therefore, our only recourse as good Muslims is to diss the Torah entirely. The tradition tells us that the Torah was holy. Our Muslim tradition tells us the Torah was holy. Right, it was holy. And then the Jews came along and falsified things. It's the Islamic doctrine of tahrif, falsification. And Ibn Hazm goes on to try to show that there are many, many places in the Torah that clearly things were added later on by different people. It's not all from Moses, and therefore not all from God. But if you do want a text that's written by one trustworthy prophet, well, that we have here in our Quran. This was the major doctrine of the day. And so the Rambam has to fight back against this. And so therefore he can do no less than not only affirm that the Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, every word, but that this is one of our Ikarei Emunah. And so what we have is that for centuries, after the time of Ibn Hazm, who lived, I guess, in the 11th century of the Common Era, we see throughout the Sephardic world, oh my goodness, there are just poskim after poskim who are constantly fighting back against this Muslim charge that the Torah is falsified. The Torah is written by many hands other than Moshe Rabbeinu. The Radbaz, who lived in Sfat, I think around 1500 or so, he writes that he ran from Bet Knesset to Bet Knesset, pulling out all of the Sifrei Torah, making sure that all of them had the exact same nusach, so that nobody could come along and say, you see, the Jews' Sifrei Torah in different places look different. And so this is, and the Rashba wrote a long missive against Ibn Hazm. So this is what the Rambam was up against. And this is why in the Middle Ages, so I think, Rabbi, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a little initial presentation, and then you can kind of take this wherever you want, ask questions. Okay. So this is why you will find a very interesting trend in the Middle Ages. As some of you may know, there are some medieval authorities, people who were certainly of standing then and maybe even be of standing today, who claimed that there were bits and pieces of the Torah that might post-date the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, beyond just the 8 verses that there's a one opinion in the Gemara and Baba Batra that says that they were written by Yehoshua. Some of these medieval authorities are ready to add other passages. Most famously, it would appear that even Ezra felt this way. But mostly, what you find is that these are authorities that live in Ashkenaz, in the circle of Rabbeinu Yehuda HaChassid, the most prominent, and then in manuscript form we have some of his followers, some of his descendants, who also say these sorts of things about different passages. You will never find a Sephardic opinion in the Middle Ages who says that any part of the Torah is written by anyone other than Moshe Rabbeinu, with the exception of the Ibn Ezra. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. And I think that, putting aside the Ibn Ezra, it's not an accident. You find that in Ashkenaz, there's openness to the possibility that there are other parts, particular verses, maybe even sometimes more than a few verses, that are written by agents other than Moshe Rabbeinu. And you will not find this in Sephardic commentaries to the Chumash. This is because it all depends on whether a Parshan was living under the cross or under the crescent, if it was living in a Christian land or in a Muslim land. See, if you're like Ashkenaz, and you're living in a Christian land, then to say that, well, maybe this pasuk, that pasuk, is written after the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, in no way imputes the sanctity of the Torah. Because in the Christian world, everybody you ever meet, you can walk for hundreds of miles in any direction, and every person you meet, Jew or Christian, will affirm that the Torah is holy, and the whole Torah is holy. So the question, is it from this prophet, a little early, a little later, is not really a question of much consequence. But if you're living in under the crescent, if you're living in the Muslim world, then when someone says, oh, there's a pasuk that might not be from Moshe Rabbeinu, it might be from someone else, the Muslims say, of course, that's what we've been saying for the longest time. Your book is not from your prophet. Our book is from our prophet. Your book is falsified all over the place. And so you have this big divide between the Sephardic world and the Ashkenazic world. And then in the middle, we have this fascinating figure of Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra is ready, he's Sephardic, obviously. He is ready, it would seem, to affirm that there are several passages, maybe even, one might say, the narrative frame of Sefer Dvarim, one can read him that way, as having been written after the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. But what's so fascinating about the Ibn Ezra is that he only alludes to this, often in a kind of coded way. It's not very clear always what he's doing. And the reason that he's writing that way is because he is a Muslim. He is in the Muslim world. He is a Sephardic writer. And so none of those Ashkenazic figures that I wrote say, oh, well, I'm going to write now in coded language and allude in a kind of elliptic way that maybe there's something else going on here. Just say it. Okay, I think this might have been written a little bit later than time Moshe Rabbeinu. Sky didn't fall, because everyone knows the book is holy where we live here in Ashkenaz. Okay. Now, what's so fascinating about this, moving ahead, is that the positions of Ashkenazim and Sfaradim flip. They totally flip around 200 years ago. And this is what happens. I'm skipping a lot of time here. Maybe Rabbi Dweck will bring me back to some of the stuff that's in the middle. What you find by, I would say, the beginning of the 19th century is the following, that in Europe, we have the beginning of emancipation. And lots of Ashkenazi Jews obviously begin to take on secular lifestyles. They abandon lives of Torah mitzvot. They begin to have all sorts of new theologies about things, reform movement, all this stuff. And what happens is that the Gimel Ikarei Emunah become a lightning rod. They become the dividing line between kosher Jews and non-kosher Jews. And especially because many Jews, when they're leaving tradition, effectively are saying, well, we don't really believe that this book is from Moshe Rabbeinu, and there actually begin to be scholarly claims, as followed by Reform Jews who say, well, no, this book is not written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Then this becomes just a total, as it is today, a third rail. This is like, you can't budge from this. because if you say anything else, then you are aiding and abetting that foreign enemy, the secular world. It's not so much the Christian world, it's the secular world that begins to burgeon and grow. But meanwhile, in the Sephardic world, as you all know, there is no real emancipation. There is no real process of secularization that goes on in the original Oriental lands from which Sephardic Jews hail. And you find really that the whole notion of Yud Gimel Ikarei Emunah was never nearly as big a deal in Sephardic lands as it was in Ashkenazi lands. In fact, the prayer piyut that we call the Ani Ma'amin, as you may know, there's an Ashkenazic version and there's a Sephardic version. The Ashkenazic version is very old. It goes back probably to the 12th or 13th century, and it got pasted inside the Siddur, and there were minhagim in Ashkenaz to say it every day. Sephardim? No, there was not even a version of Ani Ma'amin in Sephardic Siddurim until the 19th century, around 1820 or so, is the first evidence that we have of Ani Ma'amin, a Sephardic version of it, which is clearly, and it started from Sephardim who lived in Europe, who saw what their Ashkenazi neighbors were doing and said, that looks nice, we'll do something like that in our Siddur as well. And as you may have noticed, it's very interesting, the Ani Ma'amin, the Sephardic version, when it gets to the 8th Ikar, unlike the Ashkenazic version, which is pretty close to what the Rambam wrote in his introduction to Perek Chelek, states that we believe that every word was given through Moshe Rabbeinu by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Sephardic version just says Anima, something I don't remember the exact. There's like one phrase at the beginning and then a bunch of bullets. Anima amin b'emunah shlema, basically Taramina Shamayim, just the way in which the Mishneh had said it, without any mention of Moshe Rabbeinu's agency. Now, I don't know whether the Paitan, we don't know who the Paitan was that wrote the Ashkenazic version. It was clearly not the Rambam. And we do not know the name of the Paitan who wrote the Sephardic version that's in your Siddurim. And so we don't know, was he being medayek here? Did he not care so much? Did he not think that Moshe Rabbeinu's agency was so important? Or was he probably, and this is probably more to the truth, he wrote his statements, the Ani Ma'amins, are much shorter. They tend to be about 4 or 5 words each, as opposed to the Ashkenazic versions, which are a little longer. And so that's in a very brief nutshell how the Ashkenazi and Sephardic positions totally switched. In the early part of the Middle Ages, Sephardim were very, very, very scrupulous about this. Every word must have come from Moshe Rabbeinu, because the threat from the Muslims pushed them in that direction. And then in the 19th century, it switches. There is no more foreign threat. The Muslim world, this idea of the falsification of the Torah kind of died down a little bit, though it's still there in modern Muslim thought. But in the Western world, in Europe, as secularism grew, as Reform Judaism grew, as biblical criticism grew, this issue of the insistence that Moshe Rabbeinu is the author of every single word became more and more and more important. I'll end with this. I've skipped over about 600 years of this issue in the middle, but I will say that I believe that when you look at how all of Gdolei Yisrael, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, all of them, from the earliest version that we mentioned at the outset, Rav Sadia Gaon, until the people writing today in our generation about Ikarei Emunah, right up until Rav Moshe Feinstein, and even contemporary figures, you will see an enormous variety about what is the standing of the Yud Gimel Ikarei Emunah. Some are radically in favor, some diss the idea entirely. You will see different interpretations of the different Ikarei Emunah. There is no one accepted text of the Ikarei Emunah, not for Sfaradim and not for Ashkenazim. That itself tells us an awful lot. But what you will find for all this divergence, I will make the following claim, that in fact, across all of these ages and all of these issues, there is in fact no machloket at all. All figures that ever weighed in about the issue that we call Ikarei Emunah were always guided by one single principle, and that was When I, posek, hogedeot, authority, talmid chacham in every generation, when I am called upon to address the issues of ikarei emunah, I will always do so with my eye on the ball. The ball is, who is my audience? Where am I living? What's going on around me? Are there Muslims with Ibn Hazm? Are there Bible critics and Reform Judaism, or a zillion other considerations going on? Looking at my audience when I am speaking, what should I say that will lead my audience to Yirat Shamayim and Kiyum Torah mitzvot? So, for example, we have in the Middle Ages, and with this I'll end just to show how the variety that we can have on this issue. We have the Maharik and a few other significant figures who say, Ikarei emunah. Why do we have to have Ikarei emunah? We would be much better off if we didn't have Ikarei emunah at all, because what's going on in our time, right, referring to their time, what we're seeing is that peasants look at their Christian friends, and their Christian friends say, oh, if you just believe X, Y, and Z, you're saved. And so our simple folk are saying, oh, well, if we just believe in a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then we're saved. And you have these major Ashkenazi medieval poskim who are saying, I just wish these people would put on tefillin, and then they would be saved. So let's get rid of Ikarei emunah. They're clearly addressing the time that they're in, and they're figuring out what is the position that they need to articulate to bring people to Yirat Shamayim and Kiyum HaMitzvot. Okay, I've said enough. So now we'll make this, I think it's all better for us on Zoom when we have a dialogue. So Rabbi Dweck, if you'd like to push back or probe or share your own thoughts, I turn it over now to you.
Thank you, Rabbi Berman. And I appreciate what you ended with, which essentially is what you began with, but after it was klal prat klal. And so I think it's very important to recognize the point that you're making, that essentially is the underlying element of your presentation, both in the book, in this section, and here tonight, that the presentation of the Ikarei emunah responsive to circumstances. Yeah, the presentation of the Ikarei emunah are responsive. And so that depending on what it is that is being, if I can ask everybody to please mute, that depending on what it is that is being highlighted around my environment or in my circumstances is what I'm going to focus on and how it is that I'm going to speak. And that's essential for us to be able to recognize. There's a great point that you make in the book in which you recognize that among those who relate to the Rambam's Ikarei emunah, there is the Shalah Kadosh and the Ramchal, who say, look, when we say the Rambam's Ikarim are the Rambam's Ikarim, it's like saying that it's Newton's laws of gravity and Einstein's laws of relativity. They've always been there. It's just that these individuals happen to recognize them, formulate them, make them famous, and so their names are attached to them. And I certainly gravitate to that, and I'll explain why I gravitate to it. There's this famous adage or analogy story that's given, which says two young fish are swimming in the sea, and an old fish swimming by them, and as he passes them, he says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish look at each other and say, "What's water?" And the point of that is that I'm just, what, Jack, are you the host? Who's the host? Please mute everybody. So the point of that is that the fish in the water that live in the water don't know what water is, because it's just where they live. It's just the environment in which they find themselves, which essentially is how it is that you open. And so there are just certain things that are known, that are part of the water, if you will, in terms of how it is that we think and the way that we see the world, the lens through which we experience everything. And so we don't really think about what does it mean to be us, as you were pointing out with regards to your example of marriage. The only thing that I think, well, there are many things, but one of the things I think is important for us to recognize, that we will often miss when we do read the responses to the impetus that are sent to us from the environments within which we live that prompt these responses, is that we think that once the responses are formulated, that whatever it is that may be added or missing from them is doctrine, and that it's all there. And if it's missing anything or it has it in a certain way, that's all I need to be concerned with. And so to begin to scrutinize those listings as the be all and end all of our Ikarei Emunah certainly is going to be an issue. So this question that kind of we're running around in terms of Torah min Shamayim, what does that mean? Nobody disagrees with that, right? Torah min Shamayim is fundamental. Moshe, what about Moshe? Is it dictated word to Moshe? Were there other people who included lines in it? What kinds of lines? Were they legal lines? Were they explanatory lines? What are we talking about? Sometimes if the stimulus isn't probing a specific issue, the issue isn't necessarily highlighted, but is nonetheless there. And so there's one issue that I think is important for us to pay attention to, at least in terms of that, of the Ikar of the Torah min Shamayim and the Moshe Rabbeinu bit, where you rightly pointed out that in certain areas and in certain circumstances, it doesn't matter whether it's Moshe or another prophet. And as a matter of fact, you bring the Tzafnat Paneach that points this out, right? He says, Mali, what does it make a difference as to whether the Nevuah is Moshe's Nevuah or some other Navi's Nevuah? At the end of the day, it's Nevuah, and it's coming from the Shamayim, and that's the Ikar. It's Torah min Shamayim. But I think that it's important to recognize that that's a major question. And the fact that the Rambam does bring that into the Ikarei Emunah, even if it is responsive to the tahrif in his time, or that was brought into his time, does not mean that that's not a major element. And that it is absolutely important that it's the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and not some other Navi's Nevuah. And it's important to have that conversation as to why it's important that it's Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, not another. It's something that the Rambam definitely spends time on. And it's something that we recognize as being a significant difference in terms of not just the Kedusha of the Torah. I mean, obviously, holiness is fine. But what makes Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, the Malachi's mention of Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi, different than all the other books of the Tanakh, even though they may be holy? Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah is very important in the eternity of the Torah, in the value and relevance of the Torah for all people in all generations. The Rambam famously paskins, at the end of Hilchot Megillah, that the other books that are not the 5 books are going to be null eventually. We won't really need them at the time of the Mashiach or later in the Acharit HaYamim. But the 5 books of the Torah, those don't budge. And so there is, and not to mention the fact that the Torah itself spends a tremendous amount of time focusing on this for some reason. The relationship between Moshe's uniqueness of prophecy and the Torah min Shamayim bit, the fact that they're adjacent for the Rambam in his presentation, is extremely significant. And it does make a massive amount of difference. Although if it is not something necessarily that is being prompted or prodded by the circumstances, it's not necessarily the element that is highlighted in the Ikarim, but nonetheless, the Rambam's Ikarim are there and put out. And maybe in other Ikarim, like Albo's Ikarim, it's inherent, not necessarily explicitly stated. So I think that that's a major aspect for us not to lose sight of. Knowing that these things are formulated in response to stimuli from the outside is important for us in being able to relate to them. How do I relate to them? Do I relate to them as that? Do I recognize that this is being drawn from a pool of consciousness, the water that we're all swimming in, and therefore it is to be seen in those terms? Or do I see this as the ultimate doctrine? I think that's the first thing that I'll present, or I'll put out to you. The other is that I think it's important also to look at the Rambam's Ikarim. Like I say, I certainly relate to them more as the Rambam's Ikarim in the sense of Newton's laws of physics, and to recognize that when the Rambam is talking over here, and he's presenting these things. When he's presenting them, he may be responding, but he also has to think, these are not just laws, and it's not the same as Maharit was saying, or the Maharil was saying, that I just want them to put on tefillin and everything will be okay. Of course, we want Jews to keep mitzvot, but it's very different for Jews to keep mitzvot and Jews to have the system with that defines the nature of their thought as a people. And that also is often missed, right? Where we look at, the whole Torah, kol Torah kedusha, the whole Torah is holy, and all of its components are holy. Let's not differentiate between these elements of Torah and that element of Torah. And sure, when the element that is the very motherboard, the wiring, the elements that are the very lens through which I see everything is understood by everybody, fine. And we can talk about the mitzvot and we can talk about the details. But when the lenses that I see through is beginning to be marred or beginning to be fogged or scratched, I need to be able to recognize that I'm paying attention to that lens. And I have to know that I'm paying attention to the lens and not the constituent parts or the properties that I'm looking at through that lens. And I think that's a very important part of recognizing Ikarim in general. Why Ikarim? Because there are such things that are the motherboard, the system in which we do everything that it is that we do. A mitzvah doesn't stand on its own with its own inherent value outside of the context within which it belongs and it's understood. So those are 2 points that I would put out to you, and I'm interested in your thoughts.
Well, one thing I do want to point out as I look at the screens on this call, and I suspect that we have people here with us this evening who are situated in Eretz Yisrael, and some who are in the UK, and some who are in the US, and probably some who are in other places as well. And all of us probably inside are saying, okay, so what does this mean for us today? And what I want to say here is that there's no one us. We are all living, well, not all, 72 of us, if that's correct, if there are 72, but the different geographic locations that we live in dictate a lot about how we all relate to these issues. Let me explain what I mean. There is just an enormous world of difference between the way in which these issues play out and their significance and their sensitivity in America and in Israel. Probably also others.
I was going to say, remember that Ibn Ezra spent plenty of time in England also.
Yes, right. So he
probably definitely influenced his thought. There's no question.
Yeah, there's no question. Yeah. When we discuss, who wrote the Torah in an American context, and we're saying, well, Moshe, but maybe Moshe plus, maybe there are passages here and there, this trips off all sorts of bells and alarms. The reason for that is that centrist orthodoxy, which I suspect if you are living in the US and you're in on this call, you fit in that camp, has always, since its inception for over a century, has always had to contend with competition on the left and competition on the right. What do I mean by that? Let's take the left. There has always been reform, conservative, more recently open orthodox, various institutions, various websites that seem to be competing with a centrist orthodox vision of the Jewish world and of Jewish history and of Jewish practice and Jewish belief. And there's always been a competition for adherence and for beliefs. And therefore, anything that is said in a centrist orthodox milieu or setting that seems to be a little bit different than what's normally said is immediately suspect of aiding and abetting the enemy that's there on the left. Or I guess since this is Zoom, I should be pointing the other direction. But you get what I mean, the left. And there's also the competition from the right. As you all know, certainly in the US, it isn't that there's a modern Orthodox world and there's a yeshivish world. There is a human chain that goes all the way from YU down to Lakewood. And there's, everyone's strung out along the way. And what this means is that when anything is said in a centrist Orthodox setting that is not, exactly what has been the toed line for many generations, then from the right immediately come the attacks. You see, those folks at YU, they're no different than all those people that have fallen off the left end. And so therefore, these issues are very, very fraught because we have no choice but to consider the competition that we have to our left and to our right. But in Israel, it's just not like that at all. In Israel, people living in what is, pretty much the same as the centrist Orthodox ideology, call it Hesder, call it Bar Ilan, whatever you want, it's pretty much the same. But just the whole setting around us is here in Israel is totally different. There's no competition from the left, and there's no competition from the right. On the left, there's no reform, there's no conservative, there's no open Orthodox, there's no, newfangled left-leaning Bet Midrash. None of that. There's just none of that. Nothing. This secular world, but that's not in competition. That's a different world. And to the right, there certainly is a lot going on to the right, but it's so far to the right, it's like the next planet over in the solar system. And so there's no competition there for who's going to be with us, who's going to be with them, what ideas are being negotiated between the two camps. Also, worlds apart. And so I find that when I have these discussions here in Israel, they're far less fraught. And I think that going back to what I said at the outset of that when rabbinic authorities speak about these issues, they must do so with a keen sense of audience. We don't have.
I understand that. I do understand that.
Yeah.
But I'm asking you about this other aspect. I'm talking about when we look at it only in terms of how it is that we're responding to the audience, we see only what's lit by the audience. And that causes us to lose nuance sometimes in terms of the issues themselves. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. And so what I'm saying in terms of, as an example, using the Ikar that we're talking about, right? In terms of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nebuah, I think it's important to recognize why that is different. What about Moshe Rabbeinu's Nebuah is, and why is it unique? And why is it so important that it is unique? That question is important in terms of the Ikar Emunah, because it's a question that talks back to the lens through which we see the world. It is not just a detail in our Torah. It is the entire framework through which we understand the Torah and everything else that we're living.
Well, then what would you say, Rabbi Dweck, about the Rasag's formulation? That the most that he said was that we are duty bound to follow the words of the Nevi'im, Hashem's words of the Nevi'im, and follow them. This is without taking,
So I think that it's very important. I think the point that you make is essential, mm-hmm. that there are elements that we simply live in until they are challenged, and then we have to highlight them. Mm-hmm. But the question is, if I'm beginning now to highlight them, what are the implications of those highlights in terms of what it is that I'm living in, if that makes sense? I don't mean to be too abstract about it, but of course, so if the Rasad doesn't need to deal with what the Rambam is dealing with in his time, it wasn't too far back, right? If he doesn't have to deal with it, so then he's not going to talk about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu has to be called with Aaron and Miriam into Ohel Moed stat because of what they decided was Gam Banu Diber. He spoke to us too. No. See, even God's responding to the problems. There wasn't a problem before Miriam and Aaron had that dialogue. Right. No. We got to deal with this. Come over to Ohel Moed, all three of you, and let me make it very clear. One of the most dramatic episodes in the whole Torah, where God comes in and says, listen, you think that I talk to you like I talk to him? I don't talk to you like I talk to him. This is how I talk to him, and this is how I talk to you, and leaves in a huff without even listening to a response. Those things are part of the way that we understand the whole of Torah, the way that we see the world. So yes, of course, the fact that Rasag doesn't mention it, the fact that the Albo doesn't mention it, doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't something that is part of the way that part of the water, in terms of the analogy. What makes a marriage work in terms of the analogy that you brought. Just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean that it isn't in there. And I think that sometimes is the is an issue that arises when they are enumerated, right? When they are developed in detail. And that is something that I think it's important for us to be able to keep in mind when we're reading those things, whether there's discrepancy one way or another, if that makes sense. Don't know if it does, but
all those things that you said, I think are true. The question is, what happens if you say all those things are true, as opposed to all those things are an ikar emunah? What if they're not an? What if everything?
They have. So that's the thing. So what I would say is the reason why the Rambam is doing that, is putting these through, is not just because of a response.
Okay.
He's putting it out because he's saying, look, without these components, the edifice falls apart. So even Albo, you could say, look, Albo put 3 out. Yeah. Without these elements, the edifice falls apart. Yes, it does.
Right.
But are those the only elements? So those are the biggest elements. Now, there are elements that are ikarim or yesodot, if you want to say perhaps better, right? These are the roots. These are the foundations. You take away the foundations and the entire thing falls apart. That is important. We may not be paying attention to the fact that a house is built on a foundation because it's the foundation. Everything's about the foundation until we actually have to start thinking about the foundation when they start drilling next to the house and they're going to threaten the foundation. So it is important to know the difference between a foundation and the house, because without the foundation, the house can't stand. So what the Rambam is saying is, if one does not recognize that Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah is fundamentally different than the other nevuot, and therefore affects Torah min HaShamayim, and that it is not okay that Torah comes through another Navi, we are missing something. And an entire edifice can fall if we miss it. That's why I think it's important.
Right. So let me just say 2 things. I have a whole chapter in the book where I try to show that the Rambam's definition of Taramina Shamayim in the Mishneh Torah.
Yes, I read that.
Right. Is not exactly the same as what he writes in the introduction to Perek Chelek. And it's interesting why he deviates from that. And I wonder whether it's because even the Rambam, and I suspect even you must, you have to admit that there's an opinion in the Gemara Baba Batra that the last 8 psukim, right, of the Torah were written by Yehoshua. The Gemara even doesn't seem to insist that it was by Nivuah, but let's assume that maybe that's what the Gemara meant. So if those 8 psukim, in other words, what does that do for the theory that you're trying to?
There's only one reason, though. We can recognize that absolutely, and those are famous psukim.
Yeah,
they're famous psukim.
Yeah.
And whether it's Rabbi Shimon, who says that, well, look, I don't know, I'm a little bit nervous to say that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write those in some way or not. Those are psukim that the Gemara raises saying Moshe could not have written these. So we're dealt with a logistical problem. He could not have written these. These are not a question of, well, maybe this is something that he would have written. He didn't write the word az, whether he wrote it or he didn't write it. These are logistical problems in which Moshe could not have written these. We have to recognize, which is very important to recognize that Chazal point that out, we're not just going to pretend that something happened, which logistically,
Right. So, but the other opinion there in that Gemara
is that Yehoshua wrote them.
No, the other opinion insists, it must have been Moshe. It's saying
wrote it B'dema,
But what it's saying is it must be that Moshe wrote even those psukim, because otherwise it's not Torah. In other words,
it says yes. Otherwise, you wouldn't say Lakoach kol Torah azot, right? The pasuk says take the Torah. You're not going to tell Moshe to take a Torah that's not intact. That's the point of the Gemara.
Oh, I thought the point of that other opinion. I don't have the Gemara in front of me now.
That's the pasuk on the
is that there's what's at stake is what can we call Torah?
Yes, the reason that is because there is a pasuk in where Hakadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, "Lekach et haTorah, take this Torah."
Right.
And so Chazal point out, how could God say to Moshe, "Take this Torah"? If it's a Torah, it's not intact. It has to be an intact Torah.
Right.
So it must be that he wrote it b'dema.
Right.
So I think that there's a recognition of, if I'm looking at the entire Torah essentially as being Nevuat Moshe, if I'm seeing Malachi say Zichru Torah Moshe Avdi, if the Rambam is paskening that the rest of the books of the Bible, the rest of the Nebi'im and so on, are not anywhere near it, and they're going to be null when it comes time for their purpose is no longer served, and all that we'll have left are these 5 books, there is a fundamental difference between them. And that the Nevuah of Moshe, the fact that you have Torah end saying, Lo kam navi Israel ke Moshe. Let's remember that again. You remember what I said to Moshe, to Miriam and Aaron? Let's remember that here again as we close the book. Ain't nobody like him. And the Torah is given through him,
Right.
specifically because of its nature.
Right.
So the only thing that I'm raising, or I think that is important for us to pay attention to, is that these ikarim are ikarim because they form the pillars and foundations of everything else. And when the foundations go, everything goes. So it's like when the Rambam talks about God, right? That's the major pillar. Hu ha'ikar hagadol. It is the most major ikar than everything else. And so we can talk about the wider pillars and the supporting pillars, but when a pillar goes, the whole thing is in jeopardy. And that is why it would seem to me that when those things are poked at in the environment, those things need to be responded to in kind. So yeah, you have somebody like the Mariel who's saying, oh my gosh, we've been dealing with the foundation so long, we've abandoned the house. Yeah, but important nonetheless to recognize why they're foundations and how we're supposed to relate to them, and we do relate to them differently.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
We're kind of at the end of our hour here.
We are.
Yes, we're almost time is almost up. I was just wondering, there are a couple of questions, but we can wrap up as well. I think we committed to a hard stop at half 9 UK time though for the Rabbi.
Okay.
But it's up to the two of you.
Well, I'm okay. I know that it's late in Arizona.
I'm good.
I don't want the Rav to have to be too extended, but I'm happy if there.
Okay, so
question or two.
There's two questions, one for each of you, which I'm going to pose based on questions that were asked in the chat. The first one is to Rabbi Dr. Berman, which is that, is there a nafkamina, is there a practical difference if one adopts the view or is open to the view that certain psukim do not come from Moshe? Does that mean that there's some practical ramification? For instance, those psukim could not have the same level of drush or something like that applied to them. And then the question over to Rabbi Dweck.
Well, let Rabbi Berman answer that. Yeah.
I don't know that would be a halachic question. I don't know. I'm not aware of a position that there's something about Sefer Dvarim. The Gemara makes, I don't recall exactly what it is. Maybe Rabbi Dweck remembers a statement about that Sefer Dvarim is Moshe mipiat smo Amran, and so therefore there's certain things about Sefer Dvarim that we darshan, don't darshan, that's different than the other. Smuchim. Okay, yeah. So maybe that, but I can't think of anything really beyond that. It certainly would have no impact at all on the Kedusha of the Torah, on its eminence from Shamayim, right? On the binding nature of halacha, etc.
Okay, thank you. The question to Rabbi Dweck is that in the Ikarim, so part of the Ikar is that all the despite the openness you kind of spoke about, that the Gemara and the Chazal engaged in the fact that certain psukim might not have been able to have been written by Moshe, nonetheless it is an Ikar of the Rambam that every word came from Moshe. And I just wondered how you dealt with that, or wanted to address whether you wanted
of the 5 books.
Every word of the 5, but including the last psukim of Dvarim and everything like that.
So the Rambam deals with that halachically, right? He deals with that halachically, and he says that there's a difference in terms of those the words, the last words, in terms of how it is that we deal with those halachically. He mentions that, I think, in Hilchot Tefillah. But otherwise, the Rambam held that, yes, I mean, every single word, that was how he held. And he defines a kofer b'Torah, a person that doesn't accept that or believe that every word was written by Moshe. So yes, the last 8 words are logistical issues, which Chazal deal with, but otherwise, and it doesn't necessarily affect the nature of the Torah itself in terms of being Nivuat Moshe. Yeah, but nonetheless, Chazal have to deal with it. So, as far as the Rambam is concerned, it's otherwise we have to think of it as though everything was written by Moshe. And he makes, I mean, he speaks about it in so many different ways in different places. He talks about the fact that Achot Lo Tan Timna is just as important as Achot Yom HaShabbat Kadisho and so on. That all of it ultimately has is the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that all of it was spoken by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe, essentially verbatim. And puts it out in many ways, many times, in many different ways. He puts it out that way.
I just suppose that on Rabbi Berman's line of inquiry, that why should that be, especially with the last few psukim and where it is contested or there are opposing views in Chazal, why should that be an ikar of the Torah? Why should that be a yesod? That even right down to the last detail, even areas where there is contest and there are other opinions, why does it need to be a yesod that comes from the Rambam, that comes from Moshe?
Because the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah is unique and different, in that, as Chazal say, he saw things b'aspakla riyah me'ira, and that his nevuah was essentially not like the other nevi'im, which is ubiyad nevi'im adameh, which means that every Navi had his way of seeing things, had his way or her way, for that matter, of interpreting things. Chazal also say you should be very careful which Navi you go to, because based on who the Navi is going to be how the Nevuah is going to be given over to you, interpreted. Not so with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah is not colored by his personality or by his personal view of things. It's not Ubiyad HaNevi'im Adameh. It is beyond paradigm. It's beyond it's beyond time. It's beyond individual perception and feelings. And that is why Moshe's Nevuah is an Ikar. Because if I don't see that, then there is no difference between the 5 books of the Torah and Sefer Yeshaya and Shmuel and any of the other books that the Nevi'im wrote. But there is a difference, a fundamental difference. Those books don't come close to the Torah. Forget about even Kedusha. Chazal don't see the same Kedusha. They're both Kadosh, but they're not of the same level of Kedusha. I mean, that's halachic as well. We recognize that the 5 books of the Torah, first of all, you're not even allowed to write the other books with it and have it hold its Kedusha b'Sefer Torah. Second of all, the way that we treat the Sefer Torah itself is fundamentally different than the way we treat any other book of the Navi that's written in the exact same way on Klaf with the Dio and so on and so forth. We make a very, very distinct difference between the Kedusha of the books of the Navi and the books of the 5 books of the Torah. And the reason for that is because it is not the same. And if we don't recognize the uniqueness of the medium through which it came from Shamayim to the Aretz, which essentially is the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, then there is no difference between those books and any other book that a prophet writes. And that breaks down in terms of what place Torah holds, the 5 books hold in the edifice that is Klal Yisrael and our way of seeing the world. Is that clear?
I'll leave that to Rabbi Berman to decide.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
So on that note,
I'm saying in terms of the question that was asked.
I mean, let's say yes for now. The point is, why would the last psukim need to be? We understand the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu as being essential and important, but why does that come down to every single word and every single letter of the Torah? Why?
Because it's what the Torah is made of. It's what the Torah. Once I start opening it up to saying, well, maybe this one and maybe this line and maybe that line, then I start to open up the actual Torah to a whole bunch, to a collage. It becomes a collage instead of a full piece. The last psukim of the Torah, or last words of the Torah, like I said, again, this is my understanding of Chazal, is a logistical problem, not an ideological problem in the sense that this is a question of ideology that's shifting or changing. And so that has to be addressed, and Chazal addressed it in 2 ways. There are 2 opinions that they address it in, but not necessarily something that is going to change the integrity, and by integrity I mean like a fabric's integrity, of the whole element of Torah and the way that it's understood or has been accepted by Klal Yisrael.
Okay, thank you both very, very much for your time, especially Rabbi Berman, for joining us all the way from Beit Shemesh. Just a reminder to everyone that this book, Ani Ma'amin, from Rabbi Berman is available from all good booksellers, and there is going to be much more from this Chabura coming soon, so watch this space and have a great
And
night.
I again want to thank Rabbi Berman so much for your time, for your contribution to the Chabura, for your amazing words about the Chabura. They are tremendous chizuk and inspiration to us. And thank you so much for your scholarship, for your Torah that you put out to us, how important it is, especially exactly at this time, how much we need your words. And Yhi Ratzon sheyafitz kol ma'anotecha chutza.
Amen, amen, amen. I just want to thank Avi and Jack and Rabbi Dweck for hosting me, and to just say that, friends, this is not an end. This is a beginning. I get emails every single day about the book, and anyone that has read it or read parts of it and wants to probe further or get clarification. I love hearing from people, and I have conversations like this on Zoom all the time with far less people than we have here tonight. So if you do read the book and you have things that you want to talk about, I feel that's part of my calling, and I'll be happy to hear from you. Okay.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Okay.
Cool too.
Very good.
And Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach to everybody. Thanks so much.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.